Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has been arrested. Just hours ago, British police forcibly removed Assange from the Ecuadorian embassy in London, where he's taken asylum since 2012. In a statement, police said Assange was arrested, quote, on a warrant issued by Westminster Magistrates Court on 29 June 2012 for failing to surrender to court, unquote. WikiLeaks said via Twitter, British police entered the embassy at the invitation of the Ecuadorian ambassador and that Ecuador terminated his political asylum in violation of international law. Last Thursday, WikiLeaks warned Assange may soon be removed, tweeting, a high-level source within the Ecuadorian state has told WikiLeaks that Julian Assange will be expelled within hours to days using the INA Papers offshore scandal as a pretext, and that it already has an agreement with the UK for his arrest, unquote. Earlier in the week, Ecuador's president, Lenín Moreno, accused Assange of leaking private photos of his family and violating the terms of his asylum, but denied the claim of an imminent expulsion after the tweets from WikiLeaks. Julian Assange took refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy in 2012, fearing possible extradition by British authorities to the U.S., where he could face prosecution under the Espionage Act. British authorities say the arrest is related to the U.S. extradition request and continued cooperation with Ecuador on the arrest, but also pledged Assange would not be extradited to a country that has the death penalty. We'll have more on the arrest after headlines. In Sudan, protesters broke out in celebration after news broke that President Omar al-Bashir has been forced to step down, reportedly deposed by military forces and put under house arrest, ending his 3 decades-long authoritarian rule. The news comes after months of protests demanding al-Bashir's resignation. Protesters have been staging a massive sit-in in the capital, Khartoum, since Saturday. Over the weekend, demonstrators gathered outside the military headquarters, which is also the residence of al-Bashir, amidst reports of tear gassing and stun-grade attacks by security forces. Reports on the ground say some soldiers began siding with protesters, signaling a loss of military support for al-Bashir. Rights groups say at least 50 people have been killed since December, while the government's been accused of jailing hundreds of activists and critics of the president, shutting down press outlets and barring foreign reporters from covering the protests. The Sudanese military has set up a transitional military council to rule the country for 2 years, according to a televised statement by Sudan's Minister of Defense just minutes ago. We'll have more on that story later in the broadcast. At a Senate hearing Wednesday, Attorney General William Barr told lawmakers he believes intelligence agencies spied on Trump's 2016 presidential campaign and that he was ordering a review into the handling of a counterintelligence investigation into the Trump campaign and possible Russian collusion. Democratic lawmakers said Barr's statements demonstrated partisanship and loyalty to the president and that he should provide evidence to back up his claims. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi told reporters she does not trust the Attorney General, William Barr.
Let me just say how very, very dismaying and disappointing that the chief law enforcement officer of our country is going off the rails yesterday and today. He is the Attorney General of the United States of America, not the Attorney General of Donald Trump.
The acting director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Ron Vitiello, is the latest Homeland Security official to leave the agency. The announcement came Wednesday and follows a string of high-profile exits, starting with DHS head Kirstjen Nielsen's ouster Sunday. The departmental purge is said to be part of a plan by Trump advisor Stephen Miller to steer the administration toward even more hardline immigration policies. Last week, Trump withdrew Vitiello's nomination to head ICE, indicating he wasn't tough enough for the role. Meanwhile, Politico reported Wednesday Trump is considering a former head of an anti-immigrant hate group to lead U.S. citizenship and immigration services. Julie Kirshner previously worked at the Federation for American Immigration Reform, or FAIR, which espouses white supremacist views and backs reforms to reduce non-white immigration. It's been labeled a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. Kirshner would replace Lee Francis Sisna, who's reportedly in line to be ousted as part of the ongoing purge at the Department of Homeland Security. Congressional Democrats introduced legislation to undo President Trump's anti-Muslim travel ban, as well as his efforts to block asylum seekers and refugees from entering the United States. The No Ban Act would revise the Immigration and Nationality Act, imposing certain standards for restricting entry and giving more power to lawmakers to oversee or reject discriminatory bans. The act aims to circumvent the Supreme Court's decision last year to reinstate Trump's travel ban. The ACLU welcomed the legislation, saying, quote, "This president has continually claimed broad executive powers to target Muslims and other marginalized communities he deems unworthy." While no congressional action can erase the pain inflicted on Muslim communities by the Muslim ban, Congress can put in place standards and checks and balances to prevent other communities from enduring that same pain in the future. In Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu celebrated his electoral victory Wednesday after his main rival, former military chief Benny Gantz, conceded. He'll serve a record-breaking fifth term in office. Netanyahu's Likud party is expected to form a coalition with other right-wing parties that would most likely give them a majority in the 120-seat parliament, or Knesset. President Trump congratulated Netanyahu on Wednesday.
But everybody said you can't have peace in the Middle East with Israel and the Palestinians. I think we have a chance, and I think we have now a better chance with Bibi having won.
Just days before the election, Netanyahu vowed to annex illegal Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank if he won. Meanwhile, Haaretz reported Wednesday an Israeli PR company boasted on social media about its role in placing 1,200 hidden cameras at polling stations in Arab neighborhoods of Israel, taking credit for the low turnout in those areas. In India, polls opened today in a highly anticipated parliamentary election that is widely seen as a referendum on Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who is seeking a second term in office. India is the world's largest democracy with 900 million eligible voters. The voting will take place in 7 phases through May 19th. Modi's Hindu nationalist BJP won a landslide victory in 2014. His main opponent in the election is Rahul Gandhi's Congress Party. Gandhi's father, grandmother, and great-grandfather have all served as prime ministers. Modi's government has been criticized for a crackdown on civil society, targeting political opponents, journalists, human rights activists, lawyers, and writers. Human rights groups have also raised the alarm on attacks against vulnerable populations, especially Dalits and Muslims. Just 2 days before Britain's second scheduled departure from the European Union, EU leaders agreed Wednesday to grant Britain an additional extension to avoid a no-deal Brexit, giving Prime Minister Theresa May and British lawmakers until October 31st to come up with a deal that all parties can agree to. This means Britain will most likely have to take part in European Parliament elections next month, which May has sought to avoid. Prime Minister May was warned by European Union leadership not to waste time. It's unclear which direction lawmakers will go next after months of dead-end debate and failed votes on a number of Brexit measures. Back in the United States, a suspect has been arrested over the recent fires that destroyed 3 historically black churches in Louisiana. The first blaze occurred at the end of last month and the 2 others last week, all in the same community about 30 minutes north of Lafayette. Authorities say the suspect is a 21-year-old man and the son of a St. Landry Parish deputy sheriff. Police are expected to release more details later today. House lawmakers passed the Save the Internet Act Wednesday in a victory for digital rights advocates who've been fighting to restore Obama-era net neutrality rules that were gutted by the Trump administration. The legislation would bar telecom companies from blocking, throttling, or otherwise interfering with Internet access according to how much customers pay or based on the websites they favor. In a statement following Wednesday's vote, Internet freedom group Free Press said, quote, "The energy behind this bill came from the grassroots, not big companies, but there were plenty of industry lobbyists trying to sink it. The overwhelming show of support for the Save the Internet Act proves how important and popular net neutrality has become," Free Press said. Despite widespread public support, the bill now faces a tough battle in the majority Republican Senate, where leader Mitch McConnell earlier threatened to block voting on the act. And independent Senator Bernie Sanders unveiled his new Medicare for All proposal Wednesday. Fellow senators and 2020 hopefuls Elizabeth Warren, Kirsten Gillibrand, Cory Booker and Kamala Harris are backers of the legislation. The updated bill adds new provisions to cover long-term care and would eliminate premiums, deductibles and copays. Private insurance would only be able to cover elective surgery not otherwise covered by the government. This is Bernie Sanders addressing press and supporters on Wednesday.
We should not tolerate a system which allows the top 10 drug companies to make $69 billion in profits last year, while at the same time, and this is really unbelievable, 1 out of 5 Americans who get a prescription from their doctor cannot even afford to fill that prescription.
Senator Sanders said he would try to pass the bill via the budget reconciliation process if he wins the presidency, allowing him to circumvent the usual 60-vote requirement for passing such a legislation. The bill currently has 14 co-sponsors in the Senate. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world.